We like to post these onto YouTube. And yeah, I'm hoping everybody's back. We kind of did a round of everybody's back. I think everybody's back.
Good. Um, Great. So good morning, everyone. Just before I start, Mark, I was wondering, last time I planned for an hour and a half, and I noticed that this time I have 2 hours. Am I right? Or is there
You
a
have
break
up to
in
two
that?
hours. You can take as
Okay.
much or as little of that time as you want. If you finish half an hour early, I don't think anybody's going to complain, right?
More lunch break. That sounds good.
And
So yeah, we
Veronique,
should be free.
much like last time, after you're comfortable and get started, I'm going to go and try to work on the electric fence around here.
No problem.
Okay.
Um, yeah, good. So hi everyone. Thanks, Mark, for that brief introduction. I'll try to my best to introduce myself as well. I guess I'm a multifaceted person, and yes, I have a background in anthropology. That's what I'm trained in. But I'm also a homesteader by passion. This year, less so because I'm moving between places, and with my master's research, it's kind of on the back burner. But it's been um, our summer fun for a while. And as Mark talked about, we tried to grow everything by hand, which turns out to be pretty hard when it comes to grains. And were interesting conversations I had with Mark because of knowledge sharing on that in that area. And it seems that it's a point where most of the knowledge of the practical knowledge has been lost of how to grow and harvest grains by hand and process them by hand, because it's kind of the main culture that has been heavily mechanized, and it turns out that it's hard to yield something by hand if people don't come together as a group. And the technology that was made for person to person scale is mostly to be rebuilt and rediscovered again. So, yeah, so we could talk more about that, but perhaps we could keep it for the question and answers period at the end, because I can talk for a while about that, and it's not the subject of today's
I
class, I guess.
I like how you link it back to like anthropology and bringing people together, because that's how farming used to be done. That's what I used to see in my old Amish community too. They would have farm work bees where everybody would get together on a farm and get something done, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and on that note, I think, well, food anthropology of food and anthropology of agriculture is not the biggest field in anthropology, but it is a really rich field. And of course it's my area of study. And it links what I do by hand and what I do with my head as well, so it's a good mix for me. But one of the most successful models I saw for human scale agriculture and growing grains was kind of a neighborhood scale. So people would have like their own home gardens and perhaps their own livestock, um, but they would have a common plot, a bigger plot for grains that they would cultivate and process together. So that's kind of the middle scale that is workable. But again, I want to keep that for the end because I don't want to take the whole class discussing this. But please bring the question again at the end, and it will be a pleasure for me to talk about that. Okay, so I'll share my screen as I have this nice PowerPoint that I made. And if you don't like PowerPoints, you can tell me and we can drop in the middle of the session and I can continue just talking. But I do have a couple of nice activities for you in there, so it should be interesting. So today's class is about food security and food sovereignty. I want to focus more on food sovereignty through an agroecology lens. So we'll first discuss what agroecology is, then to go to food security and food sovereignty and see how the two work together. So come on here. A little note about me. My name is Veronique. So if Veronique is hard for you to say, I'm okay with Veronica as well, no problem. I did my BA in anthropology and I finished it in 2018. I'm currently finishing my master's. And as Mark probably told you, the subject of my master's is food sovereignty in with like food sovereignty, but uh, through the community farm model. And so I'm doing this research with Hayes Farm. So it's a collaborative research. So I'm not working on my own on my side, but I'm working with the folks at Hayes Farm and more specifically Claire, Carol, and Edie, and we're a research team together. So we decided the research subject together, and the people who would interview and have in focus groups, or the people who would ask to fill surveys. And then what we are in the process of doing right now is to sit down together and look at what answers we got, and to see what comes out of that research. So our guiding research question is, how can the community farm model work towards greater food sovereignty in the community around Hayes Farm? So it's really to see, okay, so Hayes Farm's mission is to get towards food sovereignty. How do we get there? And how could the community farm model, as it is embodied through Hayes Farm, can get towards that? So it's a super interesting research. And so far it yields super interesting results as well. But more than being interesting, the goal is to be practical as well, and to be usable. So to be of use for the community and for the farm as well. So I plan to finish in September, perhaps December. We'll see how things go. So that should be done after that. And aside of this, I said I was also a homesteader, which is on the back burner this year, but I'm also a teacher. And my goal is to teach at the college level, which is not the same in Quebec and in New Brunswick. But for now, I'm teaching at high school right now, which is also great. And I have the pleasure to teach to you guys. And I'm eager to hear more about you. So I put my contact here. Whenever you want, during the class, after the class, a year after the class, no problem. You can write to me, and it will be a pleasure for me to answer you and to have a discussion with you. If email is not great for you, we can also look at other options. So phone or text or Facebook or anything in between is fine as well. So I'm super reachable. I'm super eager to talk with you if you're also interested. Okay, so now you're a big group this year, and I'd like to hear more about you. So we'll go around the table, and I will ask every one of you to tell me your name, your background and interests, and then what are your expectations for today's class. And again, you share with me and with the others whatever you want to share, but you have no obligation to do so. But at least tell me your name and your expectations about the class, so that we can have a nice and meaningful discussion start.
I will start, Doreen.
Okay.
I will start. But my name is Doreen Paul. I'm from Tobic First Nation, and we're funded through Three Nations, okay? And what Three Nations is doing in for the First Nations in New Brunswick is they're starting for us to have food sovereignty, right? They want us to have our own gardens at our reserves, our communities, and feed our people. And our reserve, Tobic First Nation, is the largest in the world, a Meliseed reserve in the world. So we have about 300 people to feed. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to our community, teach what we know into the schools with the kids, which they already have their own gardens, and to our communities, and to help promote them to have their own gardens. And eventually we're going to have our own big garden to feed our community. So that's why I'm here.
That sounds great. And I heard about Three Nations before, and about different projects for food sovereignty. And I'm super happy that you can be funded by those projects, and that you want to bring back the knowledge and the practical inputs and skills you got in your community. And I hope this continues in the future as well. So super happy to have this conversation with you today. And before we go further, I want to say I'm not the expert, although I might sound like it, and a master's degree might sound like it. That's not how I consider myself. And I think I have as much to learn from you that you got to learn from me and from each other. So I'm more like a facilitator today than an expert, and I'm really eager to see your contribution to that class, Doreen, and how you want to bring back that to your community.
Yes, I seen this last year on through Jedi. And I was like, oh, I wish I could, because I wanted to do it personally for myself, right? And I says, geez, I wish I lived closer to Ferriton, because I live 2 hours away, right? And then when this opportunity came up, and I was asked to do this, you know, I'm fortunate through Three Nations that they are funding us to come here. Because other words, if it wasn't for Three Nations, I wouldn't be able to afford this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super great program. So I'm glad it exists and that you can benefit from it as well. Right. Thanks, Doreen. Somebody else wants to jump in?
My name is Emilio. I'm on the same program as Doreen. I also really am interested in trying to figure out how I can help with Indigenous food sovereignty as the best way I can. I'm very interested in also developing a network, kind of like a community of people that might have an answer that I don't have. And yeah, I just really love farming.
Great. That's a good start. Sounds good. Thanks, Emilio. Somebody else wants to jump in?
Probably easier if you just sit there.
I could say people's name, but I like to see who wants to jump in first, and I don't want to force people either. So, but if nobody comes up, then I'll name people as they appear on the screen.
I can go. My name is. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
Go ahead. My name's Allie, and I'm from Fredericton. I was born and raised here, and I'm really excited to hear this lecture just because I think my whole mindset comes from the viewpoint of community and how to like best serve your community. And I have a really big heart for particularly like high school students. We had this amazing program that started the year that I was like leaving high school about how to kind of develop different food programs for different demographics in the school that would need lunches and different meals that weren't provided for home sovereignty, because I've seen it in action in different ways, and I just want to learn more for myself of how I can serve my community through it.
Great. Thanks, Ali. I saw Zachary.
Yeah, that was me.
Great.
I'm a student at UMB at Fredericton, and I'm in the Environment and Natural Resources program. I have some previous farming experience, so I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to learn more.
Great.
My name
is
Dallas.
Dallas.
I'm from Woodstock First Nation. My background is mainly in culinary arts and a couple other things, I guess. The main reason why I was interested in the course is because I'm really enthusiastic about Indigenous food systems, and I guess I'm excited to hear kind of what you have to say about food sovereignty, because that ties a lot into understanding Indigenous food systems, and how important it is for the Indigenous community to have access to certain resources to be able to have that food sovereignty.
Great. Thanks, Dallas. Sorry, I did not hear. I heard First Nation, but I did not hear which one. Did you mention it?
Woodstock First Nation.
Woodstock, thanks. I'm just taking notes for myself so I remember people, but I thought you said the First Nation, but I just heard First Nation afterwards. So thanks for precising. All right, somebody else wants to?
I can go.
Yeah.
I'm Julia. I'm originally from Vancouver, but I've been here for about 7 years. I'm trained as a nurse, but I'm also interested in gardening and a lot of activist work, like for homelessness and social justice stuff and climate change. So I'm really interested for this class. I was reading some of the readings you gave us, and it sounded like very similar to permaculture, but like on a more kind of like bigger scale. So I'm kind of interested in how those two things can.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of those concepts intersect, and permaculture is really close to agroecology, which is really close to food sovereignty. So the focus today is on food sovereignty and agroecology, but we can talk about other related concepts as well. So I'll be happy to discuss those in the periphery as well. But as you said, perhaps it's a question of scale. And it's also a question of perhaps way of seeing things, but we can discuss it further afterwards. Okay, somebody else?
I can go.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Jess McWilliams, and I'm from Tragedy. And I'm a student at St. Thomas. I'm studying, I'm doing a double major in women and gender studies and environment and society. And the reason why I chose to apply to Hayes Farm is because I'm really interested in being as self-sufficient as possible, like as much as I can in the future. And yeah, I was really interested in all the changes you can do with the food systems by yourself compared to what can be done globally. So I guess that's what I'm interested for, like also for this presentation today, like, yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, somebody else wants to go? Or do you name people? Okay, I'm gonna name people. So Mark is not there right now. I have Tom B. Who is Tom B?
That's funny. I was gonna push the button, but I didn't.
So you're there now. You're in the spot.
Yeah. So I'm from Woodstock First Nations. My reserve's not currently involved with Three Nations or three. I can't remember the education group. Three Nations. Anyways, the reason I wanted to be involved is because I think that we really need to take care of our food, like for ourselves, because if we don't, last year I saw how stupid people got with toilet paper. And if things really go bad, we need to be able to take care of ourselves. And that's what Ursula and I kind of started doing, was we started raising chickens, our own vegetables and stuff, and doing a bunch of gardening. And I just think it's important for people to know how to do that. And I want to learn more and hopefully share it with people.
Great. And yeah, you're right. I mean, last year we had a perfect example of selfishness rather than community thinking about toilet paper. But it also yielded interesting questions about what is important to us Western humans, like toilet paper being first before food and other important things. But I mean, it's a society question at this point and a culture question, but you're right that we also need, it also brought us awareness that we actually first need each other to thrive, but also we lack a couple of important skills to be able to provide ourselves or to take care of ourselves, as you said. So yes, it's an interesting awareness, I would say, but and it's also interesting to see what the pandemic does to the food sovereignty movement and to how people question themselves and come to think about food in a different way, because some things that we took for granted could no longer be taken for granted, and we need to see and understand what goes into producing food and putting it on the table. So it's a little like taking not taking, but being conscious of the whole food system the way it is right now, and then thinking about how it could be different after that. Thanks, Tom. I have Matthew here. Are you here?
No, I'll go next. I'm Ursula.
Okay.
I'm Tom's partner. We also own a greenhouse. We've started homesteading. We provided the community with starter vegetable plants, fresh fruits, vegetables, things like that. And I was given the opportunity through Three Nations Education to take part in this. And I'm hoping to learn more because we plan on using Mark's connections to get us a bigger greenhouse like is on Hayes Farm from Scott's Nursery. So we're hoping to have that up maybe by the end of this summer. And then I'm also going to be taking the teachings back to my reserve and helping them with the greenhouse or wherever or whatever they happen to have thought for us or whatever. But that's my big goal is to take away some more teachings because we plan on, my big dream is like a permaculture, which, as you said, ties into the food sovereignty because, you know, like I want to plant like, oh, we actually bought land and we're growing fiddleheads there right now. But I'd like to produce more. Like we have raspberries and strawberries, but I'd like to be able to get to like a bigger size to open a U-pick that's like it's, you know, a good enough size for our community at least. And those are my goals.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, you talked about fiddleheads. So you planted them or you
We
transplanted them?
transplanted them. Yes, I'm on Tourism New Brunswick's website, me and my pickled fiddlehead recipe. I'm pretty proud of that. I was the first Indigenous person to be featured on Tourism New Brunswick, and I was there for my pickled fiddleheads.
Great. I was curious because I mean, if you're into permaculture, it's a long-term project of growing perennials. And as I remember, fiddleheads take a while after transplanting to be producing or reproducing
3 to
enough.
5 years, yep. It's been like 2 years now, and we can get like a little bit, but it's only like a small amount, but it'll get there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also a question of educating people as well to know, like, when you have a perennial plant like that, that is also wild and that is also precarious, like which amounts you can pick and which amounts you should leave in place for regeneration. I guess it's all into your project as well. It sounds really interesting, and I wish you the best of lucks with that project, and I hope it expands, and I hope your greenhouse project comes to comes to fruition as well, and that you get funding and infrastructure as you need it. And I'm super eager to hear more about it as it goes
Well,
forward.
thank
And
you. We actually opened up last year and we were really successful last year because I don't know, but the pandemic kind of made us more successful because everybody was wanting to garden and to start like buying plants. And so we kind of sold out. Like everything we put out for sale pretty much sold. Like we did amazingly well in our first year.
great. So I'm super happy to hear that. So at least the pandemic has good sides as well.
Yeah.
And getting people on farms and in the woods or wherever it is in nature is one of those benefits or good side effects of the pandemic. So good that you can use that to fuel your project. And I hear that it's out to a good start. So I'm really eager to hear more
Thank
about it.
you.
You're welcome. Who else do I have here? I have Tom. Is it the same Tom? Are you logged twice or is it somebody else? Okay.
I don't know.
Is there another Tom in the class?
There is
or-
another Tom, yeah.
Okay. Is the other Tom there? Doesn't seem to.
I think
Okay.
Tom and Faith had a bad internet connection. So I'm not sure, but I saw Faith put her introduction in the chat. So I don't know if Tom
Oh.
had the same trouble.
I perhaps totally missed the chat. Let me see that. I'm still full screen. I don't see the chat. I don't know what Zoom is doing to me. Oh, here it is. I really don't see the chat. I don't know what happens with that. Oh, more chat. Here it is. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. I have a couple of people here. Backing away. That was marked. My connection is unstable, right? Okay. Right now. That's fine. Faith. Okay. So I'll read for Faith. Are you, do you want to speak, Faith, or is your connection too bad for that? Okay. So I'll read your introduction. My name is Faith. I have a background in culinary arts. I've never farmed before, but I was interested because farming and culinary seem to go hand in hand. I'd like to learn how to grow anything successfully, and I've killed many little plants before. I want to learn lots here and look forward to it. Okay. So it's a good aim. It's a good goal. It won't be today's class focus, but I hear you on killing young plants, and that's what any new farmer does. So it's okay to start there. And even after that, at some point we have to make choices. So when we weed or when we want to, or our plants to thrive, so we do have to be violent to some extent, even if that's not what we want. So but I guess you're in better hands with Mark and Cecilia to learn about gardening hands-on than in this class. I could also give those kinds of classes, but I'm not physically there with you in New Brunswick, so could be another year. But I'm much more confident in Mark's and Cecilia's knowledge. So it's coming up, but it
Claire.
won't be today's class.
Her name's
Sorry?
Claire. Claire, you mean?
Claire? Oh yeah, Mark
Yeah.
and Claire. I was also talking about Cecilia Brooks, because she's the Indigenous instructor, as far as I know. So she should give you a couple of classes as well, at least hands-on workshops or activities. So we'll see what I can ask Mark at the end if I'm still right, or if the curriculum changed in between. So, and then kudos to Ursula. Great. Okay. So Faith, I hope I read your contribution right. Sorry for my English pronunciation sometimes. So culinary is a word I haven't said before, so it might sound a little weird. Okay, so Tom, do you also want to put your introduction in the chat? You could do that if your connection is so-so this morning. And then I have Matthew Golding. Are you there?
I am. And hi, Veronique. It's Matt. How are you?
Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. So I'm like eavesdropping on the class just to learn more about food sovereignty. I have completed my degree in environmental management, and if I pursue a master's, this is the realm that I'm going to exist in. And so thank you for doing your talk, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Did you take the class last year, or?
It was, yeah.
Okay, so you're taking it a second time. Okay, good. Well, glad to see you. And I want to say that I always have, well, I still have your gorgeous pictures on
microphone.
my little pamphlet. Oh, hi, Tom. We had you for a second. But yeah, thanks, Matt, for your beautiful pictures. And please take some more, because they're always awesome.
Thank you, I will.
And congrats for your new position at Hayes as well. That's great. All right, so Tom, can you speak? Can you talk, or because we hear you from time to time?
I can go now while we wait for Tom.
Okay. Yes.
My name is Leah Sapir. My background actually is in child and youth care. So it's totally opposite from this, I suppose. I'm also studying at UNB to get my elementary education degree. I'm in my second year of that. But I was interested in this program because I've always kind of wanted to learn, how to be self-sustaining. Because like a lot of other people have said, like, you never know when we're going to get to a point where we need to be self-sustaining. So I just feel like learning about food sovereignty kind of like around the world is very interesting. So I can, take that knowledge and bring it with me, I guess, and pass it on to the future generations that I may be teaching. So yeah, I guess that's why I'm here.
Great. Can you tell me your first name again?
Leah.
Leah. Okay, thanks. Sapir, right?
Yep.
Great. So I got the last name, but not the first.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, and your name on Zoom looks like iPhone, and I'm pretty sure
I
it's
can't
not your...
figure out how to change it.
So good. Okay, so did I forget someone? There's still Tom. Are
Me,
you...
but my mic is not working.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
is it working?
Yeah.
Oh, it's working. Oh, well, that was a lot of rebooting. Yeah, my name's Tom. I'm from Elsipog First Nation. I'm also in that program with the Three Nations. And for the longest time, working. I've never been really working. I've not been a contributing member to my own society, so more or less I was working off reserve. And what better way to give back with this, something to sustain the community, and yeah, be a big contribution to my own members. Sorry, I have a hard time talking. Yeah, you know what I'm trying
That's good. All right, sounds good. So thanks, Tom, for taking the time to have your mic work, and it's a pleasure to hear you and to have you on board.
Yeah.
All right. Did I forget someone? I think everyone talked. Sounds good. Okay. And then we have Mark, but he's working on the electric fence, so that's fine. And I'm pretty sure you know him already, and I know him as well, so we're all here. Okay. Now, getting to the right place. Do you still see my screen? You do?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so as I said, first we're gonna go through the basic principles of agroecology. So I'm not spending the whole class on this, so it's gonna be like a 15 minutes review. So if you have other questions or want to go deeper, please ask. You can ask them throughout or wait until the Q&A session at the end, no problem. So I'm gonna go pretty fast, and if ever I go too fast, let me know. Right. So the definition we work with, or I work with in this class, is the FAO one. It's not because it's the greatest organization in the world, but because it's a definition people go back to when they want to have a common point of agreement. So agroecology, according to FAO, is an integrated approach that simultaneously applies ecological and social concepts and principles to the design and management of food and agricultural system. So what we have to remember here is that it's an integrated approach. So it's a holistic approach that takes everything in consideration. So it's, yes, ecological, but also social. So anthropology and sociology are of great use to agroecology, because we don't only want to think about plants or animals or food production, but we want to think about humans, non-humans, plants, animals, insects, non-living beings, infrastructure, everything together, and how it comes together as a system that is respectful for all of its parts. And then, yes, it's the design and management of food and agricultural system, but the overarching idea is that it's integrated and that it takes all parts into considerations. Did you want to say something, Doreen?
No, I don't.
Okay. Because I see your not your screen, but I guess your picture flashing from time to time, but it might just be your mic that is open and that it captures ambient noise. It's fine. I don't mind. It's just that Zoom puts you on the spot for me. So I'm like, oh, does she want to stop to talk or not? So good. All right. So according to the FAO, again, there are 10 elements to agroecology, and we'll go through them quickly, but I want to go to the 8 pillars of agroecology according to La Via Campesina, which is much more closer to peasants and to common folks than the FAO is. So according to FAO, the 10 elements are diversity. So a good agroecological system is diverse in terms of humans, but also of non-humans, plants, animals, insects, and the landscape as well. So diversity is the first one. Co-creation and sharing of knowledge, super important. If we want to be respectful of people and to work with nature, we need a lot of knowledge and a lot of different perspectives. So we need knowledge sharing. Human and social values. So humans are in the center of food production rather than seen just as customers. Synergies. So that's basically how the energy that is created through good relationships and good cooperation. So between humans, yes, but also between humans and plants, between plants and animals. So we can think about synergetic systems where one feeds the other. So for example, a pond where there would be ducks and wild rice and aquatic plants and fishes. So you could have a system that feeds itself, or basically, but needs a couple of inputs, but still. And that yields more than what is put into it. So that's the idea of synergy here. Efficiency again. So here we're still talking about FAO, but the end goal is feeding people. So we need to be efficient at some point. Culture and food traditions, big part. Circular and solidarity economy. So the rest of the economy that is around agriculture also needs to be circular. And what is yielded needs to be put back or given back. So we want to recycle not only things, but also energy, workforce, and money into the community so that everyone could thrive. Recycling, same idea. Resilience, so super important right now in times of pandemic, like how resilient people are. And responsible governance. So yes, food sovereignty and agroecology pass through responsible governance. So control over how food is produced. So either local or more global, but with a good link of people to between people and who takes the decision, or people who take the decisions. And that link needs to be honored and needs to be honest as well. So governance is a whole other topic, but it has its place into agroecology. Okay, sounds good for so far? Great. Okay. So now I want to turn to a different set of elements. So here it's La Via Campesina's 8 pillars of agroecology. I think there were 7 to start with, but an 8th one has been added. Some of them are similar and others have different orientations. So they're listed here as keywords, but we'll go through them because I think they're all super important and it gives a good idea of the direction of agroecology. So the first pillar is agroecology is a way of life, not just a set of technologies or production practices, and must be adapted to local context. And it's the first pillar because it gives an idea of the 7 other ones and how they should be seen. So here, they're not like the 10 commandments, or here is agroecology and here is how you implement it in your area. That's not the goal. So that's why they're pillars, or we could say values. But what agroecology will look like in different places with different peoples on different farms in different communities will always be different. So in any case, it's always adapted to the local context because traditions are different, the soil is different, the landscape is different, the population is different, the ecology of the place is different as well. So it will look different, it has to. And the first thing that we should think about in agroecology, and it will be the same with food sovereignty, is how we can adapt it to our community or local context. And then it's a way of life. Yes, it depends on how convinced you are and how deep to your heart you have agroecology. So it's not only about growing plants or raising livestock, but it's also about thinking about the whole food production system and the way that we we live our life as well, and we live in community. So that's how I see that it could be a way of life. But then if you base your whole life on agroecology, that's also possible. It's not my case, but it could be possible. So then again, you adapt it to yourself. So it depends on how you want to treat it. Okay, the second pillar, production practices should be based on ecological principles and an understanding that life cannot be commodified. So this is a subject of debate because at some point we're still living in the rest of the system, so we do have to make a living. But at the heart of agroecology, the goal is not to make money. The goal is to feed people and to live together well with other humans and other non-humans, and to be respectful and regenerative. So the goal is not to make money, although at some point in between it might be necessary in order to survive in the current system until it changes somehow, or it shifts. But the basic idea is that life, or anything that we eat at some point, is life, and anything other people we interact with is also life. So it cannot be modified. So it should not be considered as products, money, or consumers, but rather as a community. The third pillar, reduction of externally purchased inputs and increased farm and community self-sufficiency will allow for greater farmer autonomy and strengthen rural communities, economies, sorry. So again, the idea is to be more self-sufficient, but perhaps at the community level. So not only like, oh, I'm self-sufficient as a homesteader, so I don't want to share anything with my neighbor because like he has to be self-sufficient as well. I mean, that's kind of selfish self-sufficiency. That's not the idea behind agroecology. The idea is to be self-sufficient at the local level as a community, but we also need those interactions with others. And so yes, greater farmer autonomy than right now in the current system, but also strengthened economies and communities. Fourth pillar, peoples and communities who feed the world need their collective rights protected in order to secure their access and control over the commons, seeds, land, waters, knowledge, and culture. So that's really interesting because it's a big clash with our nation states right now and how our political systems work. So we're in, no matter if you're in Brunswick and Quebec or in the States right now, or political systems and legal systems are based on individual rights. So here we're talking about collective rights, and it's a totally different thing to talk about what each person and each individual has rights to, and what as a community, as a people, or as human beings altogether, we have as collective rights. So seeds should be the first one of them, land and water as well. So, but right now we're in a system that, yes, most people think they should be common rights and they should be accessible to all, but at the same time they're commodified. So more often than not, land is privatized or belongs to someone. The same with water, it's put into bottles and sold. And seeds are patented and sold to farmers. So the same with knowledge and culture. So with patents or other ways of commodifying culture. But it's a question of shifting our perspective to actually, why should it belong to people like individuals or companies? It should rather belong to all and be something that anyone could tap in, not for individual benefits, but for common benefits. So that's one of the pillars of agroecology, but it's also one of its biggest challenges. Right, fifth pillar. So knowledge sharing for food producers must be horizontal, peer-to-peer, and intergenerational. So we talked about knowledge sharing before. So it's not only a question of like having experts teaching students. That's not the goal, and that should not be the goal of education anyways. But in agroecology, it's rather seeing the strength in a group and being able to share with one another, And why intergenerational is important is that often traditional knowledge or agricultural knowledge is something that older folks have and that sometimes they put aside to adapt to modern society, for example. But who needs to learn? It's the younger folks. And so if you connect the folks who have the knowledge with the folks who want to learn, so basically, let's say older people, or we could even say the elderly and then the youth, if we connect them together, we have a super important social connection that is created so that the elderly could be less lonely to some extent and could be more integrated into society. And the youth would have the best teachers in the world. They would have their grandparents to learn with or community elders to work with. And so this super important knowledge would be passed down to further generations as well. So it's sad to say, but this intergenerational knowledge sharing is something that has to be rebuilt into our society right now. And in that area, I think we have everything to learn from Indigenous communities and the importance of intergenerational sharing and also elder knowledge and importance in the community. But I don't want to say too much on that. So if you want to bring your contribution to the class, you can talk more about that, but I don't want to talk in your place either. Right, sixth pillar, and there will be two others after that, and then I stop talking for a while. So sixth pillar is direct, fair distribution chains, transparent relationships, and solidarity between producers and consumers are needed to displace corporate control of global markets and generate self-governments by communities. So whatever cannot be produced on the spot and that needs to be exchanged or bartered or bought from somewhere else needs to be done through solidarity and also transparency and fairness. So ultimately, it's possible, but it's hard to be 100% self-sufficient. So when we're not, we also need to take care of our relationships with other producers in other places. And to be fair, so not only think about how cheap is the food, but also how producers should be paid in between. Right, seventh pillar, agroecology is political and requires us to transform the structures of power in society. And I think I've talked about it a little through the other pillars, but we see from now that yes, agroecology implies politics and it implies a systemic change as well. So at some point, yes, some people are less keen about talking politics than others, but at some point, food is also political and it's also built in the social and political system. So we do need to take part of that at some point. And so we also need to see further than the current system. So we need to think further than just, oh, well, the system is like this and this is how we survive nowadays. But we have to think further than that of how things could be different. What could we do to make things different? And where can we go from here? So not only we should try to see what we can do rather than what we cannot do. All right, and last pillar, youth and women are the principal social basis for the evolution of agroecology. Territorial and social dynamics must allow for leadership and control of land and resources by women and youth. So that's most possibly La Via Campesina's own perspective. They put women and youth at in the middle of food production. Why? It's because they're an important workforce, perhaps I would not say less so here, but in different societies, they might have a bigger role, but they're still pushed on the sides when it comes to taking merit or taking decisions about how food is produced. And so the idea is to first honor their contribution, but also give them back the power that they should have in producing food, and taking care of the community and taking decisions as well. All right, so I would be ready to jump to food security, but before that, that was a really condensed part on agroecology. Is it still fine for everyone? Did you have questions or things you wanted to share with the group on that? Sakahi?
I was just gonna say I'm good. I don't have any questions.
Oh, okay. Good. All right. Did anyone have wanted to say something or?
I
Sounds
suppose
good.
it's interesting. It's interesting how every one of these pillars do have some sort of relationship with like indigenous experiences with our relationship with food. Yeah, I just thought that was kind of a interesting interesting aspect of all the pillars.
Yeah, definitely. And La Via Campesina is a big international peasant network. And one of their goals, I would say, or one of their values is to always put local knowledge and like local cultures in on the spot, even if they're international. So what it does is that, yes, they build on indigenous knowledge and indigenous uh, common knowledge, I would say, from around the world. So yes, there are big differences between cultures, but there are also common points that we can find when we talk to each other. And that's basically what they try to put forth. Um, so yes, I agree with you that a lot of those pillars talk to indigenous experience and to perhaps tap into indigenous cultures and communities and how they work. Um, and the goal is to always to be respectful, but also to work and to share common wisdom. So yeah, I agree with you, and I'm glad that you see common points with practices or experiences in your community. And again, remember the first pillar is to adapt all the rest to your local context. So the best thing you could do is to think through those pillars or orientations and see how they could be implemented in your community and how they could benefit your community best.
I think it's important to recognize too that like culture is kind of a byproduct of like of where people are, right? It isn't necessarily that, we manifested our own culture naturally. Like a lot of it was kind of derived from, the surrounding ecology that existed in any given place. Like the reason why people eat the way that they eat, the reason why people speak the way that they speak, and, um, practice or enjoy the different aspects of their life that they do, I guess, is all based around what their surrounding, what their, I don't know, their experiences, their personal experiences.
True. And it's true that cultures evolve while interacting with their environments as well, and cultures interact with one another as well. So it's super interesting. But as you said, it's linked to where they evolved as well. So your food ways, for example, will depend on what was available there to start with. So I would say a stupid example, but traditionally, I mean, there would be no llama recipes in Mi'kmaq communities just before there was no llamas here in North America, for example. But then rather they would focus more on foods of the products of the forest or food produce, or well, food from the seafoods. That's what I wanted to say. So seafoods and fishes, for example. But then after that, I mean, they also interacted with other cultures, and they might have incorporated other elements and shared with others. So all the richness of cultures come, yes, from how they evolved with the land, but also how they interacted with others as well. And so it's, yes, it's a great fit to start thinking through traditional foods. And it brings us to thinking about how we can best interact and work with nature where we are, because there is huge traditional knowledge about how to make the best out of what is available in a certain place in traditional food ways. Right. Oh, sorry for that. Are we ready to move forward? All right. So here's the part where we will have to do something. So we'll talk about food security briefly, and then we'll jump to food sovereignty. So I will first ask you, food security, what does this concept make you think about? And now here's what you have to do. So you can use either your cell phone or another web page, and you can go online or text. So what we do right now is a word cloud. So the idea is to text or type all the words that come to your mind when you think about food security, and they will appear here. So if you decide to text using your cell phone, you have to text Veronique Ham, well, so VERONIQUEHAM 520. So it's on the screen. And the number you have to text to is 37607. So if you type my code to that number, it will get you into the poll, and we will use it for the rest of the lesson as well. And after that, you will be able to type in your answers and it will feed here. If you decide to go online, you have to go to that website here. So paulev.com/VeroniqueHam520. And you will land on the place where, on the word cloud, and you'll have to type in your answers. So whenever you're ready, and if it doesn't work, let me know and I'll try to guide you through that. Yes. So when you're ready, you can type what comes to your mind when you think about food security. So if we have many times the same words, they will grow bigger, and words that appear only once will stay smaller. But the idea is to brainstorm as a group as to what food security is, right? Availability, access. So does it work for everyone? All right, it works. If anyone has problems with this, please let me know. I'll help you with that. So far we have access, reliability, proximity, community. Oh, it's shift. Affordable. I'll read them at the end because I will get a headache otherwise. Great responses, everyone. So I just want to say that this word cloud is made out of single words. So if you want to have a phrase together, you should put a hyphen just to stick it. So for example, I saw burden barriers and financial. So if you wanted to say financial barriers, it will appear as two words unless you put it with a hyphen. So you could put financial hyphen barriers, and then it would appear as one word. Okay, no barriers. Oh, sufficient is growing bigger. And you can also look at what others wrote. And if you agree with one of the things that is there, you can also type the same word. There's no problem. So it will just make it bigger and have it more importance in the word cloud. So for example, if you think that availability is something super important, you can type it again and it will just make the word bigger. It's fine too. Right. That's becoming super interesting. Okay, I'll leave you perhaps 10 seconds. So if you have final thoughts, type them down. All right, so I'll read the answers. So just stop typing so I don't get a headache, please. So the biggest word we have is sufficient. So I guess self-sufficiency and sufficient food as well. So that's our biggest word here. Then we have access, availability, and community that are the second biggest words. And then we have a plethora of smaller words that were typed once. We have financial, I guess, was barriers, local, planning, survival, reliability, seed banking, no barriers. So I guess no financial barriers. Did someone want to talk? Okay, good. Diverse, stability, independence, grocery store, affordable, proximity, and fragility. So here as a group, before I told you anything about food security, we already have the bulk of the knowledge about food security. So what is food security? It's so food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So the basic idea behind food security is that everyone has food all the time, and not just cheap food and white bread and sugar and flour, but or junk food, but rather healthy and nutritious food, and also culturally appropriate at some point. So food security is really to make sure that everyone has healthy food all the time. So this is just a parenthesis to talk about food insecurity. So when people are food insecure. So yes, it exists in Canada. If you thought it was a third world thing, it's not only a third world thing. So we Food Secure Canada had a big, I would say, survey and a big research made in Canada, and they found out that about 1 in 8 households in Canada was food insecure. So that means about 4 million Canadians, including 1.15 million children. So that was in 2018. So it might be a little different today, but the numbers would be pretty similar 3 years later. So what it means is that we have more than 10% of Canadians who actually don't have food on the table every single day of the year. So yes, food security exists here. It's not equal in all the overall population. It's more like it happens everywhere, but it's not equally distributed amongst everyone. But yes, it's something that we have to address here. So examples of food security, you perhaps know them already, but I'll just mention 2 of them. So Breakfast Club of Canada, if you heard about them before. So the idea is to make sure that school kids have access to food on a daily basis, even if it's just at school, it's already that. And then food banks, so they have different names, and they have there are different local examples of that. So the idea is to alleviate hunger and provide a social safety net for people who cannot bring food on the table. So again, here the idea is not to engage people in growing food or to learn them how to grow food or to involve them in their food system, but just the basic line to make sure that they have something to eat. So that's the idea behind food security. All right. Do you have any questions on or things you wanted to share on food security?
I think
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just made me think of a couple things, like especially with the pandemic, like it made, I don't work with kids, but I have a couple of friends who are teachers, and just like, you know, when kids weren't going to school, exposing how many children were like going without meals that they relied on like in schools. And I thought kind of a really interesting, I would say more shift towards like maybe not food sovereignty, because it's like still like not a lot of local food, but how a lot of like community groups kind of just took on volunteer opportunities to like hand out those lunches anyways to kids. I thought that was super interesting. And then just making me think too of like with what you were saying of kind of food security, how it doesn't quite live up as much to sovereignty, because like say I work with like a lot of low income population, and so much of the food that's served to these folks is like such poor quality, and it's just all like packaged like granola bars and like Rice Krispie squares, and all these folks like technically they're getting food for free, but like it's got no nutrients, and there's no, like what you were saying, like knowledge transfer, like autonomy. So just kind of all, there's like, you know, we think of poor children a lot, but also like hungry children, but kind of other groups in society that are living with that too. So
Yeah, but as you said, I mean, I'm not saying food security is not good. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just that I wanted to make the difference between food security and food sovereignty. So we're going to talk about food sovereignty in a couple of seconds. But the idea is like having food, even if it's cheap food, is better than no food. So I agree with you that they have to eat something to start with. And then in the definition of food security, it should also be healthy food. So another step would be to improve the food that those people would get. But then again, I think there's an extra step that could be done with food sovereignty. And food security and food sovereignty go hand in hand, because if somebody is super hungry and you tell them, well, I won't give you any food because I want you to grow your food, so wait until next year. I mean, it wouldn't make sense either, right? So they do have to go hand in hand. And I don't think they are, I'm trying to contrast them here just to show what they are. But the idea is not to say one is better than the other, or one should supplant the other. That's not the idea at all. And I mean, in terms of the pandemic, I was so mad last spring because the school I worked in were, well, I mean, it didn't matter at that point. There was this question of like, okay, well, if we have students' papers and then we don't want to hand them back to them because of the virus, so what do? We put them in their desk like the week before, and then like a big thing. But then they pushed the nonsense up to saying that, well, we can't give water bottles to students and we can't give them like granola bars or snacks or things. And I was working in the school that was in a poor neighborhood of the town nearby where I live. And I was like, well, you know, like virus or not, if you don't give them those snacks, they won't have anything to eat during that day. And if their mother or father forgot to give them a water bottle in the morning, like you're telling me they're gonna be thirsty all day and they won't drink anything? Like what the and I was so mad. Then it took like 2 weeks before they realized it was nonsense, and that they had to find a way to at least make sure those kids had something to eat. But yeah, at some point during the pandemic, I mean, we witnessed a lot of nonsense, and that was one of them. So I don't know if similar things happened in other school boards here or happened in New Brunswick, but I know that's a problem that we as teachers had to flag. We're like, we can't do that. I mean, I'm gonna hide granola bars in my desk and give them to students anyways, but you can't do that. I mean, yes, the virus, but then if the child is thirsty and hungry the whole day, it won't yield anything that they're in the scroll anyways. So yeah, food security is super important. That's why I wanted also to talk about food insecurity, because it exists here in a pretty big proportion. I mean, it's not the whole population, but it's enough to be detrimental to newer generations. So it's something that we do have to address.
With COVID, food security, I wonder, like, what are the challenges and sort of the solutions to figuring out how we can sort of cut all those issues out?
I honestly don't know if food security is worse or better than before the pandemic. It shifted people's purchasing habits for sure, um, and perhaps eating habits as well. Uh, and my guess is that in the first weeks of the pandemic, during that disorganization or that confusion, there would probably be more food insecurity. But then, not because of the government, but mostly because of community organizations that reorganize themselves. Um, I think people did a great job at making sure that everyone had what they needed, what they need, like what it, anyways, made sure that everyone had what they needed. But I'm honest with you, I didn't look at numbers of what it was before and during the pandemic. I'm not sure those reports are available yet. They might be in the following year. But if you want, I can look at them and get back to you next week about that.
Yeah.
Would you like
I'm just
that?
curious what like regulations were thrown out as far as, farmers markets and stuff like that. Was there like a don't do it until we give you like further notice, or was it like, I don't know.
Well, and I think that's really interesting too, because like I'm really interested in like structural thinking and how all things like are connected. And so like I think in the early days of pandemic, everyone was like, we're all in this together. And there was a lot of like, mutual aid and that kind of thing. But now as it's kind of like become this new normal, like even if food was there, like the transit system in the city is cut in half. Like charities aren't getting as much donations as usual. And so I think for really low income folks who maybe were like going to the food bank once a week, like I would be worried about their ability to even like get there physically compared to, the buses were running more frequently. So I think looking at this, it'll be really important to like look at all the different systems that were affected. Cause, even if the food bank's there, if you can't get there, it's not very useful to you. But I think there have been some like really positive things, but I also would be interested in how like
That's very true.
Definitely.
I think.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go
I was
ahead.
just going to add on to what Julia was saying about food security. I mean, the food banks are. It's kind of ironic because the food banks are put in place because of kind of like food insecurity. So people can have that access, but then you're having more people that are, trying to utilize that aspect of like food security instead of like going to the grocery store simply because they can't afford to buy groceries. So they're going, so that more people going to the food bank like create less availability of food for a larger population of people that can't necessarily afford it.
So it's kind of like it kind of like proved itself to be like more appropriate times like this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, just thinking about it, it's kind of like the one thing that we thought was going to hurt food security is sort of kind of proving itself to be the one that's encouraging it.
That's true. And I mean, I definitely don't have the answers to that. And I think as a group, we might have more wisdom than I would, especially since I don't live in New Brunswick in the moment. But it's everything you said so far is true. So it's true that even if the food banks are there, they have less donations this year than years before. It's true that public transportation is affected by the pandemic. So if it was the only way people could get to the food bank, then it's just, this way is severe, so they couldn't get there. Also, you asked about farmers markets. So I know here in Quebec, they happened anyways, but it was not very successful because yes, people wanted to go outside because of the pandemic, but it was not that pleasant experience that they wanted to have usually of meeting the farmer, seeing the produce, and then like perhaps touching it and buying it and having this sensorial experience. Like they were in front of plastic glass, and then they had to have all those safety measures, and same for the growers. They had to pack their things even if they wanted to have less plastic. So it was kind of not so great for the growers and for the customers. And I know that I think that in New Brunswick, most farmers market took place anyways, but it was again with regulations, and they had to have a certain protocol for sanitization and handling of produce and things. So if you want to have a better idea of what farmers markets look like in New Brunswick last summer, you can ask Claire and Mark, because I'm not sure for Mark, but I know Claire had a farmers market stand every weekend, so she might have a better experience than I had with that. And she could be more able to tell you what happened exactly and how it worked. And I know from friends here in Quebec that it also happened, but it was not a huge success. So they tried to have it happen despite the pandemic, but it was not really as successful as other years. So yes, in terms of food sovereignty, I might have more questions than answers right now, but it's true that even though it's more in the focus, like as people think more about it, there might be less resources and less accessibility tied to it. So I will definitely look at if there are any reports, studies, or surveys that have been done since last year. I will look for both New Brunswick and Quebec, but mostly New Brunswick, so that it's more relevant to you guys. And if I have any insights, I'll share them with you, but we can also take class time to discuss it together, because I think the best is, again, to bring our knowledge together to have a better idea of the situation. All right. So sorry for not having any answers for you this morning on that topic, but I'll try my best for next week. And again, just that small talk was already eye-opening, just to think about accessibility and public transportation, for example, farmers market. So we can definitely continue this discussion next week. All right. Are we ready to talk about food sovereignty? Good. So again, I have another poll everywhere for you. So you can even either take your cell phone or your other web page. And now I ask you to type any word that comes to your mind when you think about food sovereignty rather than food security. And they could be the same words. So if you have the same words popping up in your mind, you type them down and it can be the same. And you can always type down the same words that somebody else put there. There's no patent or license on the words. You can type them down as many times as you want. All right. Again, if anyone has problems with poll everywhere, let me know and I'll help you out as best as I can.
Veronique.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see, like, because I was just kind of thinking about how food sovereignty doesn't necessarily mean having access to, say, like a grocery store. It's more of like a diverse, like you need a diverse array of different ways to get food, right? Different varieties of access to food. So the food bank, the grocery store, farmers markets, subscription programs for vegetables, things like that. And I'd be interested to see if there's any studies that can correlate like diversification of food access versus singular limited access to food.
Singular access.
I guess if
food.
there's any correlation between diverse access to food sources versus more limited access to food sources pertaining to food sovereignty or food security in particular areas.
That would be really interesting. I don't have any study for you right now already prepared, but I can again definitely look at it for you. I'm pretty sure Food Secure Canada has something on that. And I will have to delve deeper into the sources I use for my research to look at if there is a link between that diversification and access to food. One thing that is for sure is kind of a paradox between, okay, if you have, like, let's say you have big superstores and Walmarts popping up somewhere, and then they kind of eat up the other smaller food sources, let's say. But then, yes, what you can buy there is perhaps cheaper than you can buy somewhere else. So perhaps it might sound good for people who have a lower income, but then is the food sold there healthy? Is it appropriate? How does it feed the community? Not so much. But when we have diversification, it's also because, yes, we have farmers market. Not everyone could afford to buy everything at farmers markets, but then it's also why you have food banks or community gardens or co-op stores. So the more you have, the more everyone could find what they need in a community. But further than that, I would definitely have to look for specific sources, and I'm not exactly sure I can find a correlation. I would love to find one. If there's like a big international study or like a broader scope study that has been done with statistical data, that should be possible to find. But otherwise, I mean, sociologists and anthropologists like me, who work more with qualitative data, like with words and knowledge and ideas. I mean, we are less good with numbers at producing numbers, I mean, but I'm pretty sure those numbers exist. I'll just have to find them. So if you give me until next week, I can share with you what I'll have found then. Does that sound good?
That sounds awesome.
Great. All right. Okay. We'll stop there for the word cloud. You give me a lot of things to say. So food sovereignty, you had a lot of ideas. So the biggest things we have is autonomy, community, knowledge, locally grown, organically grown, rights. And then we have smaller ones: distribution, inherent rights, local control, community involvement, cultural diversity, non-GMO. I saw non-Monsanto at the beginning. Empowering, shared, community gathering, traditional knowledge, wild harvest, knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, involvement, security, sustainable. So a lot of the things that are there will be the things that I'll present to you in a couple of minutes. So again, as a group, we have great knowledge together. The things that come out a lot are community, autonomy, organically or sustainably grown, but also knowledge. It's not like it's a big word there, but it's also in a lot of other ones. And so knowledge is one of the important themes of food sovereignty that is perhaps less so there in food security, and that might be a big difference between the two. All right, so according to the Declaration of Mielny, which is kind of the biggest definition in food sovereignty, says that food sovereignty is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. So food sovereignty is, yes, access to food that is healthy and culturally appropriate, but also that it's sustainably grown, and that they have their right and to be involved in their food system and to decide about what is done and how it's done. So knowledge and control would be two things that are important in food sovereignty, that are the core of food sovereignty, but that might not be there as much in food security. So there are 7 pillars of food sovereignty according again to La Via Campesina, and I'll pass through them pretty quickly because, as you will see, it goes back a lot to what we saw with agroecology, but also because I want to go into examples more. So first, food sovereignty focuses on food for people, not food for profit or food for money, but food for people. Then it builds knowledge and skills for the farmers and the food producers, but for the whole community as well. Then food sovereignty works with nature. So the idea is not to work against nature to bring out the biggest yield, but rather to work with nature in accordance and in respect of nature. Food sovereignty also values food providers. So not like in our society today where farmers are kind of considered not at the bottom of society, but almost. And so in food sovereignty, we want to value them more, to value the fact that food providers are what keep up, like people who keep us alive, right? And who provide us food. So they should be valued. Their knowledge should be valued. And they should not be seen as backwards or on the margins of society, but rather in the middle of society and kind of the avant-garde of society a little. I'll come back to this one at the end because it's the seventh that has been added afterwards. Food sovereignty also localizes food systems. So the idea is to produce food locally and to think locally before thinking globally or thinking big. And then again, the same idea. So it puts control locally. So if decisions are taken at a bigger level, then it should be a good link between the local and representatives of the local population. And then why I underlined this one here, food is sacred. It's because originally La Via Campesina worked on 6 pillars, but then they wanted to include more indigenous perspectives into their vision of food sovereignty. And so the 7th pillar that they added was food is sacred. So there should be this sacred dimension of food and of medicine and of nature that should be incorporated in food sovereignty as well. So again, it's a question of shifting our perspective on that. All right, sounds good. Do you have any questions on that before I jump to the examples? All right. So 2 examples here. The first one is a farm that I visited in Maine, which is incredible if ever you have the chance after the pandemic. It's called Mi'kmaq Farms. It's in Caribou, Maine, so it's not so far to where you guys are. It's a trout hatchery. It's a farm and a farmer's market. It's run by and for the Mi'kmaq community there. And their goal is to produce safe and culturally significant food for their community. So it's run by the Aroostook band of Mi'kmaq there. And it's just amazing what they do. So they have this farmer's market, they have big fields and a greenhouse, and they have this wonderful trout hatchery where they can grow food and have people from the community buying the food. It's partly subsidized, so it's also accessible and I would not say cheap, but like affordable food for them. And it's also a great place for knowledge sharing. They have workshops there, they have community activities. So it's kind of an all-in-one that was just perfect for them. So, and the basic idea behind that is that it's by and for them. So that's why I see that as a perfect example of a nugget of food sovereignty. So it's not the only initiative in the community, but it's a big and super important initiative that feeds the rest of the food sovereignty system. And another example I wanted to share with you, and it goes back to what you were talking about, Dallas, about food sources and food distribution. So it's called Park Slope Food Co-op. It's in New York. And it's a new model of co-op where members volunteer to get cheaper prices and take a part in their decisions. So here's not about food producing. So the co-op doesn't produce anything. It's about food distribution. So how this co-op works is that people who are members of the co-op have to volunteer a couple of hours per month. But what that does is that the food they buy afterwards is cheaper because they don't have to hire people per se, because they have that many so many volunteers. Just because if every one of the members volunteer 3 hours per month, altogether they can run the store and they can buy in bulk. So it brings down the prices of the food, and they try to source it locally and to have healthy food as well. And so through that, even if every single person does not put that many hours into volunteering, together they can have like the best prices for things that are not grown, that they could not grow themselves because they live in New York, for example. So that's an example of, again, a nugget of food sovereignty. They don't produce the food, but they have control of where they source the food. They can increase the availability of food as well, and the distribution of it. And they also strengthen the community, and they have workshops and newsletters and other things through that to share knowledge. So it's another great initiative to do that. But again, I wanted to have this example to show that it can also be about food distribution and not only food production. All right, so contrasting food security and food sovereignty together, I mean, there are different ways. One is to see food security as the goal and food sovereignty as the process. So that's, for example, the idea of Food Secure Canada. So if their ultimate goal is that everyone in Canada would have access to food anywhere, anytime, that's the goal. But then how they would get there is through food sovereignty. So through having people decide how food is produced and how it is distributed, and increasing people's knowledge on how to grow food, how to cook food, and where to find food, and all those things. So they see food sovereignty as a process to get towards the goal. Another way of seeing it is kind of the opposite, is to see short-term versus long-term. So food security would be the short-term solution. You don't have food? Well, first we'll make sure that you have food, and then I can show you how to grow, like to grow it yourself, and to we can find ways to make it accessible, and to increase people's resilience and sufficiency. So the long-term approach would be building food sovereignty. The short-term approach would be making sure people have food. And then a last way to see the difference between food security and food sovereignty is access versus control. So food security is access to food, whereas food sovereignty is control over how food is produced and where food is produced. And then with control comes knowledge as well. So these are kind of 3 ways to see them.
Excuse me, are we going to be able to access this after this? We're going to be able to access the PowerPoint?
Definitely. So
awesome.
What we did last year, and that I think we do again this year, is that the session is recorded, or I think it is. Mark told me it was recording, but I also send the PowerPoint to Mark, and then he can send it to you afterwards. So you have the PowerPoint. You're having me noticing that I'm not sure. Yeah, it's recording actually, so it's fine, because I guess Mark made me the host afterwards. So it's recording, so you also have access to the class, so our Zoom class right now, but you also have access to the PowerPoint after that. So you'll have everything in hand to review it whenever you want and access the references. Sounds good? All right. So I'm putting you on the spot again, and we'll have a little poll just to see. I give you 4 different examples of food initiatives or community food initiatives, and I want to know whether you think it's food security or food sovereignty. So you'll have to access Poll Everywhere again. So now you just have to type the answer. So if you think that it's food security, you type A, and if you think it's food sovereignty, you type B. So programs and insurances to protect farmers from fluctuating economic and environmental conditions. Do you think that's food security or that's food sovereignty?
I'm sorry, could you read that again?
Yes. So programs and insurances to protect farmers from fluctuating economic and environmental conditions. Sorry. So these programs and insurances already exist. But I would like to know whether you think these are initiatives towards food security or food sovereignty. Okay, here we go. All right. 50-50. So it's a subject of debate, whether we're talking about food security or food sovereignty here. I think what depends is who runs those programs, right? So if those programs are run by like big banks that are part of the current agribusiness, and they're yes, securing farmers, but also binding them in the current system and not controlling them, but almost, then we would be more into food security. And even so, it would be kind of, not sure. But then we can also rethink those programs and insurances. So perhaps other formulas would be to like have perhaps a farmers co-op bank or co-op insurance to help them deal with those fluctuations of, yes, the economic conditions, but the environmental conditions as well. So it's a reality of farmers that agriculture is not the same every year. So they do need to have those insurances and programs. But then how they're run, if we go into governance and how it should serve farmer or not, then we're talking about food sovereignty in that case. But ultimately, yes, we make sure that everyone has food every single year. All right, second example. Implementation of a community land trust, where a whole community owns the land together and uses it democratically. So are we talking about food security or food sovereignty? Oh, sorry. What happened? Okay. Sorry for that. All right, so everyone agrees that it's a question of food sovereignty. I would say definitely, because in the first years, it's not sure that everyone will have food. Depends on how successful we are with the land trust. But ultimately, we'll have a community land to work on, and we'll be able to grow food. In between, there's a lot of knowledge sharing and knowledge building that goes there. So yes, it's a food sovereignty initiative. So it doesn't mean that in the short term, people will have more access to food, but in the long term, they will. Right. Third example, creation of a collective garden where all work for, where everyone works for the whole group and share the food production. So here we're talking about a community garden, collective garden, sorry. There's a difference between the two. Just let people answer first. So do you think a collective garden is more about food security or food sovereignty? Four responses. All right. So it could be both. So a collective garden that is successful, yes, brings more food to people, but it's also a lot of learning through that and skills building and sharing. So it's also about food sovereignty and producing food locally and learning how it's produced. And collective garden, it's its own challenge. People have to agree on what they grow and how they distribute the food afterwards. So we're talking about control. So it's also food sovereignty here. Right, last example. the creation of culturally appropriate nutrition guidelines by and for Indigenous people. Are we talking more about food security or food sovereignty? I'll just show the responses afterwards. Some of those guidelines, just by the way, exist. But again, I don't think there exist as many of those nutritional guidelines as there are First Nations. So there is still a lot of work to be done in that area, and it's amazing. So here, yes, we're talking about food sovereignty. It could work towards food security as well, because it tells us what food is healthy and culturally appropriate for different Indigenous peoples or different First Nations. But ultimately, it's also working towards food sovereignty, because it's Indigenous people deciding for themselves what is good for them in terms of food. And then they can also influence what food is produced and what food we think about when we think about food accessibility. All right. So thanks everyone for that. I just want to go quickly around the table before the Q&A session. Oh yeah, typo here, sorry. It's kind of my, that's my branding to have typos. Agroecology and food sovereignty. So now that we talked about the two, what common points do you notice between agroecology and food sovereignty? And if you want to bring permaculture in there, you can do it as well. So we can go around the table. Who wants to share what they noticed?
Hi, this is Ursula. My phone died, so I'm just with Tom on his.
Okay.
So for me, I noticed the connection with permaculture, like with all of it. And I was kind of like stuck in my own ways and my own thoughts of what permaculture was. And this has like opened it up more. And I see like a more like on the grander scale, I guess, of things like, and how they're all almost interchangeable, but they're all like a kind of the same. So that was an eye opener for me.
Great, I'm glad to hear that. So yes, they have a lot of things in common, definitely.
I think a lot of things would be like social concepts, and the principles kind of works with knowledge and stuff like sharing and stuff like that. So kind of like a community type thing is like a common thread between these two things, sort of helping and sort of being almost like an organism in its own self. It sort of learns.
True. So to bring the social into food production is a common thread between the two. Thanks.
I would say like local diversity and empowerment, like it's supposed to vary like localized systems and devolving of power structures. And so, yeah, like an empowerment of the local and thereby like diversity, because each local is going to have its own unique.
Definitely. Matthew?
I just wanted to like build on like that local idea that Julia brought up, and like you mentioned the local context, and so like food consumption will be very different from place to place. And like my favorite example is like we shouldn't be eating avocados and citrus and other things, and there are foods to get those benefits locally, just people don't know them.
True. So to rebuild the knowledge of what is available and what can be produced locally.
Stop holding out, Matt. What type of vegetables can we replace avocados with?
Well, I don't know avocados, but I can tell you where to get vitamin C.
That sounds good. Yeah. Somewhere else than in oranges and lemons. So somebody else wants to share what they noticed?
I noticed that like it's really important to I'm losing my words, but to be aware of everyone's different needs. And yeah, I don't know, because everyone's gonna need different things, therefore we can focus on how we can help each other out.
True. And not only everyone has different needs, but everyone has different skills and different strengths. So when we think at the community level, we can start thinking about what everyone can bring to the community. So perhaps a certain person's strength is not um, I don't know, growing plants for, let's say they kill all the young plants and they don't have that much of a green thumb. They can learn from somebody else that has those skills. But on the counterpart, but perhaps that person is really great with cooking, so knows how to preserve. So they could learn that other person, they could teach that other person how to make preserves. And then the more people you put in the community, the more you can start seeing those synergies between who has different skills and who needs different things, and how we can all benefit each other's, and how we can learn from each other and help each other out as well. So that's definitely true. All right. Somebody else noticed something that they'd like to share?
I guess I kind of noticed that there's like a certain level of consciousness that you need to approach agriculture with, in order, because if you don't practice like a certain level of confidence where like you understand what you're doing can affect like whether or not your practice actually falls under like the structure of like food security or food sovereignty, like once you start to stray too far away from providing food for people as opposed for profit, like you have to constantly be aware of, like, have the self-awareness of like what you're doing your agriculture for, what's your specific purpose, and not to kind of diverge too far away from that. I think our like agriculture kind of turned into this huge like industry where it kind of originated in this communal sense of living and it was done for the purpose of community, and now it's kind of like a for-profit organization, very capital driven. So if you're trying, when you're like, in order to incorporate food sovereignty and security like into your practice, like you need to constantly be conscious of like what your choices are.
Definitely. It's a continual struggle between surviving as a farmer or as food producers and producing for the community as well. So it's not that easy all the time, but as you said, it's a matter of consciousness and of choices, ethical choices we have to make throughout. All right. I'll continue just because we're a little short of time. And I want to talk about, so I'll let you read those if you'd like, or just a bunch of questions that we could ask ourselves as a group. But I want to talk about next week, because next Thursday we have another class together. And in this class, we will learn from each other. And so what we'll do is called cooperative learning. So we will talk about land and agrarian reform. So we'll talk about, yes, the current agricultural system, but we want also to look at alternatives of how land could be used and managed differently. So rather than me covering all those topics, I'd like you to choose one of those topics and to present it to others next week. And the way you present it is up to you. So it could be video, it could be your own little PowerPoint, it could be just a talk, it could be what you want. But the goal is that we have 13 different models here. And I believe you're 13 students. And if there's an odd number, I can cover up the rest. But the idea is that we all learn about a different topic and we bring it together next week. So next Thursday. And again, no stress, no pressure. Like, it's fine. It doesn't have to be like a class per se. It's just, you just have to share what you found with others in the way you want to present it. So I'll say what the different models are, and then we can choose what we want to work on. So the first one is community supported agriculture, or CSA. The second is community land trusts. The third is farmers cooperatives. The fourth are land banks. The fifth is spin farming. Then incredible edibles, local exchange trading system, collective gardens, commons, gleaning, agroforestry, and vertical farms. So does anyone, oh, sorry for that. Does anyone have a preference on one of those topics? I'll
I would
just
like
come
to
up here.
do, oh,
Go
I
ahead.
would like to do agroforestry, please.
Yeah. So Jess is doing agroforestry.
I'd like to do the vertical farming, Ursula.
Yes.
And Tom would like land bank.
Okay.
I would love
so
to do
that's gonna be-
collective gardens. And that's Allie.
How do you write Allie?
Just ALI.
Okay, great.
I would like to. Oh, sorry.
Incredible
sorry.
edibles.
Okay, Doreen, incredible edibles. And then Emilio?
Local exchange trading system. I'd like to learn about that.
Oh yeah, they are fascinating.
And
All
it
right.
was me, Ursula, that I signed up for vertical farming.
Yeah, is that you, Faith?
No, Ursula.
Oh, sorry. I was confused. Sorry for that. Ursula, great.
I'd like
I'd like
go
to
with
do community land trusts.
Okay,
That's
so
Leah.
Leah, community land trusts. And Zachary?
I can
I'll
do
go with-
commons.
Sorry, not all at the same time. Who said commons?
Faith.
Faith, okay. And Zachary, what did you want?
I will go with the farmers cooperatives.
Okay, you wanted something else? I have community supported agriculture, spin farming, and gleaning left.
This is
Ooh, we have-
Julia. I can do
Yep.
spin.
Right, that's great. And then we have, I think we have Tom and Matt left. Am I right? Matt, are you still there? Oh, Dallas is missing as well. Dallas?
I can do gleaning.
Gleaning?
Yeah. Don't know what it is. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Let's go with the exercise. Sounds good. And then, Tom, are you there?
His mic is not working right now, but he said he'll just take whatever's left.
Okay, so I have CSA left. Is that fine?
That's fine.
Okay, good. So I wrote them there. Am I missing someone? I think Matt is not there. Did you want to take that part in that exercise?
If like I don't know if I count. Like if you wanted me to come back with something, I certainly could though.
I think it's
yeah, I could. I mean, it depends on you. If you don't want extra work, you don't have to do it.
I
But
don't mind.
okay, if you want, yes, you can look at another. You can come up with a surprise. So another
Sure.
alternative to land use that I did not list here, and there are tons of other alternatives as well. So I can just write that you'll come up with a surprise. Oops, that's too big. Here we go. So I'm eager to see that. Great. So are you okay with what you have to do for next week? We'll see each other again next Thursday morning. If you have any questions in between or you don't find links, anything, I'm super reachable again. So you can just write to me and I'll send you links and resources you can use. And again, no pressure. It's not a big presentation. It's just to learn from each other again. And I'll put those this list in the email so you'll see what subject you have if in case you forget it. All right. We consumed that all the time that we had. I'm really sorry for that, but I wanted to leave room for the discussions we had during the class, which were awesome. But I'm ready to stay there a couple of minutes for those who would like to talk about other things or to ask questions. So feel free to do that. If you want to go eat lunch, you can do that as well. So from now on, you're free to do what you want. And as I said, I'm okay to stay here a couple of minutes with you to discuss things we did not have the chance to. if you'd like so. Right.
Are you okay with answering any questions about the hand harvested wheat, like the grains and stuff?
Oh yeah, right. I left that for the end. So, yeah, the thing is that when we started growing food, my husband and I, we were allowed to use the land at his parents' place, which was pretty huge for two people. And our goal was to be self-sufficient, but the whole thing. And we're both vegetarians. So we started with a chicken coop, but no other animals. And we wanted to produce, yes, our vegetables, ultimately our fruits as well, our legumes and our grains. So the first ones worked out really well. So the vegetable garden was awesome. Fruits took a little more time, but it's in the process of happening. Legumes were really great for growing and harvesting as well. And we hit a wall when we came to grains, because sowing them and having them grow was feasible. Harvesting them and processing them was less feasible. So nowadays, most grains are harvested with, I always forget the name of that thing in English. It's harvester, thresher, is it? I'm not sure.
Thresher?
Yeah, but they're on tractors. It's a kind of a big wheel that collects grains as they go. I'll find out the name of that for next week. I
Combine?
always
Is that what it's called?
Combine. Yeah, thanks. And so since that's the way that most grains are grown, and that it's not so easy to do on a small scale, like the technical knowledge, I dropped my pen. The technical knowledge to grow and harvest grains by hand at a human level is almost lost, and few people have the technology to as well. So we first harvested our grains, and the first year we grew oats, buckwheat, and we tried rice, but it was mainly oats and buckwheat that we had. So we had the scythes to harvest them. It was long, but we did that, so that worked. Then for buckwheat, you have to dry it as well, because you have ripe seeds and you still have flowers at the top of the stalks. So you have to let them to dry for a while. That worked as well. But then the first thing that did not work was to collect the grains out of the stalks. So we could do it by hand, but for a whole field, it was not feasible. So one of our ideas was to use flails. I'm not sure I'm using the right word. It's kind of two sticks bound together with a chain, and you just hit the grains like that. Do you know what I'm talking about? I think it's called flails in English.
I think that's right, like a nunchuck kind of, right? Yeah.
Okay. And what you would do with that is that you would put a tarp or a bed sheet on the ground, one of your bunches of grain stalks, then you would cover it up with the fold of your tarp or your bed sheet, and then you would hit it with a flail until all the grains are shattered down to the ground. And so that would only take the seeds out of the stalk. So we actually did not have flails to start with, because it's something that people don't use anymore. So we did not have any of them. We did not find any of them either. So my husband's father proposed us to build those flails, which he did, but he works slowly. He's great. He's like a hobby blacksmith, I would say, and he's great for building stuff, but he takes time. And so when the flails were ready, the grains were rotten in the field. So that's basically what happened. But then we tested it with a couple of grains that we kept in the garage. It worked super great, but we did not have a second test year of growing a whole field of grains again. But then even if you do that step of taking the grains out of the stalk or off the stalk, you have to open kind of the shell on the grain. So in the case of buckwheat, it's like a little pyramid. So the shell is really visible. In the case of oats and wheat, you have the grain and then you have like two little leaflets next to it. And that's kind of the coat that you have to take off. And again, that's another thing that people don't have any equipment for anymore. So you could grind them, but to be able to grind the grains just to remove the coat without breaking the seed within, you have to have a super precise grain mill, and you have to adjust the height of the second wheel so that it just rubs the grains and it takes the shell off. And then you would have your grain. So from that step, sorry?
Oh, I was watching like a guy that was doing something like that, but he was old fashioned way. I think it was with stone.
Yeah.
And he was just doing a quick circle around his bowl thing. And it was cool, fascinating. But he was saying that technique takes like 3 hours for like enough to make a loaf of bread. It's kind of like, oh, that's pretty cool.
That's another thing. So there are other ways of doing that. But then it's a question of time versus what you get to eat. So another way for rice grains and works with oats and buckwheat as well is to have a super big mortar and pillar, and then you just pound your grains for a long time until like everything shatters, and then you have to sort them out.
Do you want some?
Oh, you're on the.
Okay. You're still your mic is open, so we hear you. That's good. You probably cooked something great, and we all want to taste it now. So yeah, so it takes time, but then when you get that step done of separating the husks, that's the word I was looking for, the husks from the grains, you still have to put them apart because you don't want to eat the husks. Eat the husk with the grain. So you have to winnow, is that it? Yes, winnow your seeds. So you would put a fan and have a bowl, and you just slowly drop your seeds in front of the fan. And so the husks that are really lightweight, and they get caught in the wind and they just go further. Whereas your heavier seeds fall into the bowl or the basket you put down. So that works. But then it's also a question of efficiency, because as you said, if you spend the whole day on preparing just one bowl of oats or rice or buckwheat or barley or whatever it is, then you're asking yourself as a homesteader, I have all those other tasks to do on my homestead. How long do I want to spend on processing those grains? So it's also an efficiency balance that we have to find as well, and that we were not so successful at finding with grains. Our best success so far was buckwheat, because it's really easy to sieve once, no matter, like, you won't have grains. That's for sure. You won't have those nice buckwheat grains, but you would have some sort of flour or a polenta of buckwheat, and it would be really easy to sieve out the husks. And that we succeeded really pretty well. So it was less time consuming, and we could make pancakes and different other things with that. So that was not too bad. But again, it's a question of how much time we wanted to put in that. And definitely, I think the best thing we could do would be to come together with our other homesteader or farmer friends and say, okay, let's try this year to have a collective grain plot for 5 families. And then when comes the day that you have to harvest, because that's super long, and the other day when you have to use the flails to thresh the grains, that's also super long. So we could come like the 5 or 6 of us together and have the task done. And again, for processing. So having it at a like community level or group level will already be much easier and much feasible. And in terms of yields, yes, a grain field yields a lot, but it's the efficiency afterwards of the time consuming process of getting the grains that is harder. So if we could get together for those big tasks and then share the harvest, I think that would be a better scale for doing those things. So does that answer your question a little?
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm kind of curious about like what types of like nutrient densities like did you find like in your research? Was there a particular like location that you had to plant, different forms of grains specifically? Like, were they better in wetter areas or drier areas or like somewhere in between?
It was first, I want to say it was not a research per se. So it was just as a homesteader. But no, it was not, it was much of a dry field. I would say that the land where we are is really dry and it's mostly clay. So the work that we have to do is to make sure that we have a cover on the soil all the time, like be it mulch or green cover crops or um, things like that, just to make sure that the moisture stays there. But no, I did not have the chance to have like those different plots and different yields. Um, yeah, we did not have the chance to try that, but we should eventually. In terms of rice, what we grew was Tuborskian rice. And it's a Russian rice variety that grows in the cold first, but also it's a what we call a dry rice. So it doesn't grow in a flooded rice field. It grows like with mulch, but still on a dry field, and that was interesting. So it's a very short variety, but it yields pretty much for the space it takes. So, but yes, I would still have to do those studies analysis between a more wetland, a more dry land, a different soil, a different location. But I haven't had the chance to do that yet. But yeah, we could look at if we want to do it, try those things at Hayes Farm at some at some point in the future. That would be interesting as well.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I'm always eager to share that, but it's kind of a failure story. But oh, I'll stop sharing here. Sorry for that. But yeah, it's I mean, there's also strength in failure. So what fails, you can improve afterwards. So it's a question of trying after and making better. But I haven't had the chance. I haven't had the chance to try a second time because of time mostly. But then yeah, it would be worth trying it again, but perhaps with smaller plots to make comparisons, but also to test the technology, because that's what failed us the first time and technology. Yeah. How cold is it at the farm? I see you guys are outside.
It's okay. I might have like a sweater and a shirt and a t-shirt and a coveralls on, but it's okay.
Oh yeah. Sounds good. So at least it's livable outside. Yeah. All right. So did you have other things you wanted to discuss, or?
I feel like we're okay for now. We have an event going on in like an hour here. Cecilia
Okay.
will be here too. Cecilia is still an instructor, and we're doing an
Okay.
exercise today. Yeah.
Good. All right. That's what I understood, but I was a little confused. I was like, is she still there? Like I thought she was, but great. So I'll let you go. I'll let you prepare that event. I wish you a really nice day and a nice event. And well, I will be happy to see you next week again.
Yes, we'll see you soon.
Bye bye. Take care.
Thanks, Veronique. We really appreciate the conversation.
Me too. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a nice day, Emilio. Right. Bye, Mark.